Welcome to Australasian Airlines video tutorial on how to operate the iFly Boeing 737. Before viewing this tutorial, we strongly recommend that you view the tutorial on flight planning, as that will give you a lot of information on how to access the resources that you'll need to know for flying this aircraft, such as checking the weather and also calculating your fuel. So before watching this video, we actually strongly recommend that you do watch the flight planning tutorial. Okay, this tutorial will be broken down into 3 stages. This first video will take us from a cold and dark cockpit, as you can see, and all flights should be started in a cold and dark flight deck. And we will go as far as the taxi stage. So once we get to the point where we're ready to taxi, we'll end the tutorial, and then the next video tutorial will pick up from the takeoff stage. So we'll start on the runway, we'll take off, and we'll get to the top of climb. And once we've got to top of climb, we'll then end the tutorial there, and we'll pick up the last part of the tutorial in the third video, which will be from the top of descent through to our shutdown at the gate. For the purpose of this video tutorial on the iFly 737, we will be doing a flight from Perth to Melbourne. So we will be using the routes and things like that for Perth to Melbourne. So yeah, let's get underway. So the first thing we need to do is check our weather. So as you would have seen in our flight planning tutorial, we go to Pilot Assist, which put Perth into there, and there's our weather there. So we've got winds 110 at 14, gusting 25 knots. And as you can see down here, the ATIS says we're using runway 21. So we've got that. The next thing we do is we would go to our fuel plan website, which was in the flight planning tutorial. We load all our parameters, and that's what we end up with, 17,324 kilos. What you then need to do is you then need to open up the iFly configurator. Now you need to do this before you start Flight Sim. As you can see, I've already got Flight Sim running, and I've pre-programmed my configurator. So what you need to do is you need to go into the iFly configurator and open up this, and you select Boeing 737-800. You then select your fuel. Okay, so as you can see, for this particular flight, I've got 90% in the left and right tanks, 80% in the center tank, and that gives us fuel of 17,501 kilos. So we're slightly over what we need, but that's not a problem. As you can see, we're well within the center of gravity. We're not overweight, so everything's looking good. Now you will need to refer to this iFly configurator for programming the FMC. So what you need to do is, the first thing you do is select the aircraft model, which is the 800. You do your fuel, do your cargo, and load all your passengers in. And you need to make sure that you don't have any red warnings here, such as center of gravity is out of its units. You're not overweight, anything like that. So if you've got no red writing down here, you're right. You know you're well within the limits. Okay, so once you've done that, you then click Update, which I can't do now because I'm already in a flight, but you click Update, and then you just minimize it, because you'll need to come back later when we program the FMC, because we need to know our gross weight and our center of gravity. So you can either just minimize this, which is probably the easiest thing to do, or you can just write it down somewhere, but I find it's just easier just to minimize this configurator. So yeah, once you've put all your parameters in, you've got the right amount of fuel, you can click Update and then just minimize, and then you can start Flight Sim. So we're now at the stage where we're ready to start getting the aircraft powered up. So the first thing we need to do is go to our overhead. So we go to our forward overhead, we come down here to our position light, and we go to steady, so that when we actually power the aircraft up, our nav lights will come on for us. So the next thing we do is we come up to our electrical panel, and we move the DC volts to BAT, which is battery, and we move the AC volts to APU gen for APU generator. The next thing we do is we actually turn our battery on, which is this switch here. So we turn our battery on, and you'll see a lot of lights come on. Okay, so there we go, we've got a lot of lights coming on there now. We then turn our standby power to auto, which is this switch here. So that goes to auto. And then we come down to our bus transfer and we move that to auto. So there it goes, off to auto. And then we come all the way down here to our APU start switch. Now it's important that you move the start switch all the way to start, not just to on. And it's 2 clicks, and then once it actually starts, the switch will automatically go back to on. So we go 1, 2 clicks, we get a light coming on over here for low oil pressure, and the switch will automatically go back to on. So what we do now is we just have to wait for the exhaust gas temperature to come up, which is this gauge here. The exhaust gas temperature will come up to about 9, and then it will level back to about 4. And once that happens, we will then be looking for a blue available light on the APU generator switches. So as you can see here, we've got blue lights above the engine generator switches. So that just tells us that they're available. Once the exhaust gas temperature comes down to about 4, we'll then get a light to say that the APU generator switches are available, and then we can turn the APU generator switches on. So as you can see, the exhaust gas temperature is now coming back down, and that'll settle around about 4. And then we're just looking for the blue light for the APU gen switches. So there's the blue light. So we've now got the available APU gen switches. As you can see up here in our electrical panel, we've got some numbers up here. We've got -2.1 because we're actually running on the bat, so we're actually draining the voltage. We've got a 24 volt system. AC volts, that's fine, but yeah, this is the one you got to really watch, because if you leave it running on battery for too long, you will flatten your battery. So it's important that once this light comes on over here for the APU gen switches, that we get them on straight away. Okay, so we've now got them on. The exhaust gas temperature has gone up to 5 now, just over 5, and you can see the DC amps has gone back to 0 because we're not actually draining anything out of the battery. And you would have seen a lot more lights come on. Okay, so the next thing we do is we come over here to our air systems. We change our landing altitude to 200, and we turn our APU bleed switch on, and we're looking for our duct pressure to come up. So that'll come up to around about 35, and then we can turn our left and right pack switches on to high. Once you've done that, we can turn our left electrical fan to auto and our right electrical fan to auto, and we can then turn our trim air on. Come over here to our heating, window heat on, so we turn all those switches on. Probe heat switches on, and as you can see, a lot of these lights are going out now. Okay, we've got to turn our hydraulic electrical pumps on. Okay, once we're in the air, or our engines are running I should say, once our engines are running, we can turn our engine hydraulic switches on, but once we're on the while we're on the ground and the engines are shut down, we need to use our electric hydraulic pumps to power up the hydraulics. Okay, once we've done that, we come over here to our seat belts. We move our no smoking sign to on, and we move our fasten seatbelt sign to auto. Come over here to our fuel pumps, so all fuel pumps are on, so just turn all those on. You'll see all these lights going out. Okay, the next thing we do is we come up here and we turn these 2 switches on. Now what these 2 switches do is they actually supply power to the passenger cabin. So anything that the passenger cabin requires power for, such as PA systems, the radios and TVs were fitted, the galley, the crew need the power for the galley, so anything like that, these 2 switches are used for. So it's important that you get those on, otherwise there'll be no power to the passenger cabin or the crew galleys. Okay, once we've done that, that's pretty much it for the overhead. We'll come back and program a few more things up here and turn a few more things on after. But we can close that down now, and we open up our aft overhead. Next thing we have to do is turn our IRS switches on left and right. So we turn these both to nav, and once these lights come on a line, we know that they're set and they're actually tuning. We don't have to do anything else on this panel, so once we've done that, we can just close that one down. Now on the main panel, you'll see a master caution light, just letting us know there's a few cautions there. Once we've actually notified that, we can just push that light and go out. That light will go out once we push that. That's all good. Next thing we do is come to our aft electrical panel. Okay, so this is where we program our radio frequencies for nav aids, such as NDB and ILS. So for Perth, we'll need to know what the NDB is for Perth. Now there's two ways you can get it. You would have seen that in the flight planning stage. You can use the FS Commander, which is as a tutorial on that, or you can use the airport charts for Perth. So what we do is we just open up the airport charts Perth. So we've got runway 21 ILS chart here, which you can see there's an NDB here for CVM, and there's an NDB here for 352. So we'll just use the 329 CVM because it's actually closest to the airport. So 329. So what we do is we just go to Flight Sim, and we put 329 into here as active. So there's 329. Now as you can see, it's got ADF 1 and 2. So here's ADF 1, ADF 2, so it's a backup system. It's also got active and standby frequency for both systems, so we can just put 329 as active in the second system, and 329 inactive over here on the first ADF. So basically you've got them. Now the way you know whether it's active or not, you've got this little toggle switch in the middle here. Wherever the little ADF writing is, the letters ADF, that's the active frequency. So we've got 329 as our active frequency in both ADFs. Okay, next thing we come up here and we turn our marker beacon on. So what will happen is when we fly over the outer marker, you'll actually hear the audible sound, just to let you know that you're going over the outer marker. If you don't turn that on, it doesn't really matter. It just helps you know that when you are flying over the outer marker. So next thing we need to do is we need to program our nav1 and nav2. Now nav1 and nav2 must be the exact same frequency in the active radios there. So what we do is we come back to our airport chart for runway 21, so you can see ILS runway 21 at Perth, and our ILS frequency is 109.50. We come back here and we put over here, you have to program this standby frequency first, and then you just make it active using this toggle switch here. So we program this here first, so we use our little dials here. So we got 109 and we tune that to 50. So we've got that, we know that's our frequency, we then make it active. Okay, so it says active standby, so we now know that 109.50 is our active frequency. We come over here and we do the same thing for the first nav1. So this is nav1, this is nav2, so ILS frequency must be the same for both nav1 and nav2, so 109.50. There we go. We double check it and we make it active. Okay, so we now got 109.50 active nav1, 109.50 active in nav2, and 329 active in the ADF1 and 329 active in ADF2. Next thing we do is put our score code in. Now you don't necessarily have to do this if you're not flying with ATC. I always put a score code in there. You just have to make one up. It just makes it more realistic, and also it gets you in the habit of putting a score code in there if you are flying with ATC. And for the purpose of this video tutorial, it actually helps you to know where that score code has to go. So you can just use these dials on the left and right here, just wherever you put your mouse, plus and minus, the same as over here. As you can see, it's got a plus and minus hand there. So any of the dials, you just got to put your mouse just to get a plus and minus, and then you'll be able to tune the frequencies as per what you want them. Don't worry about comms too much unless you're using ATC, but yeah, you can just change those the same way. Again, you've got your active and your standby. I wouldn't worry about anything up here, they're just your fire warning bells. Unless you've got failure set in your flight, you won't have to worry about any of those. So that's pretty much it for the electrical panel. We'll come over here and we'll come back to our main panel. Now you can see here it's got an FMC message. Now this light will always come up whenever you have an FMC message, and you know you've got one on there now because wants to know some information in the FMC, but usually when you're in flight and you get a message like that, it means that there's a problem with the FMC, and you've definitely got to check it out. Now at the moment there's not a real problem because we haven't even got to the FMC. So all we need to do is just cancel that by clicking on it. The light will go out, and then we can open up our FMC. Okay, as you can see here, this is the message. It says enter IRS position. Okay, you remember over here on our aft electrical panel we tuned our ILS frequencies, and now see how these lights are flashing a line? That just lets us know that we haven't actually aligned our position. So we haven't told the aircraft or the FMC where we are actually situated. So we now do that. So we can just close the aft overhead, and we come in here now to clear this message here. And whenever you type something in the bottom here, if you ever make a mistake or you have a message showing up, all you have to do is hit the clear button, the CLR down the bottom here, and that will disappear. If you go back to your aft overhead, you can see that these are still flashing. Even though we've cleared the message, we haven't actually aligned our IRS, so until we do that, these will still flash. So all we need to do now is hit position, POS, okay, and this will bring up our information. Now there was another thing I forgot to tell you. In the index we go into ident, and we make sure that we are running the latest AirAC. Now this says AirAC 1113, which is available for download from our website in the FSX files, or there's currently so that's available for our download through our website. Just click on FSX files and browse the available files, and you'll be able to download that. Now included in this one file is the AirAC for the iFly 737, the Level D 767, and also the FS Commander AirAC file as well. So they're all in the one file. So you just have to download that file and install. So just double check when you first load up before you actually install. Before you actually load the aircraft, make sure that you've actually got that AirAC installed. And then when you actually come to this stage, just check the ident and make sure that you have got that 113 in there. So once we do is we then go position initial. We come back to our main position page. So what we're doing is we want to tell the aircraft where we actually located. So this is our last position. So this is where we are at the moment. We're at gate 14 at Perth. So we now tell the aircraft that's where we are. So we click on that. We click on the button next to that position, and you'll see it come up in the bottom there. And all we do is just click on the button next to this IOS position, and that will then put that in there. Okay, as you can see now, our primary flight display has now come alive, and so has our multifunction display. So until we actually get that IRS position in, the primary flight display and the multifunction display won't actually come up. Next thing we have to do is tell it our reference airport. So we're actually at Perth. So the code for Perth is YPPH, and we just chuck that in there, and that's our airport reference there. Now, if you need to know what the code is for Perth, again, you just come back to the airport chart, and it's got it up here, YPPH. So everything you need to know about the airport can be found on these charts, or you can also use FS Commander, which has all the information as well. So it doesn't really matter which way you go, it'll give you the same information. So we've now got our IRS position locked in there, and we've got our reference point. So next we now go is to our route. Okay, so we need to put our origin in there. So YPPH is already in the bottom here. So all we need to do is just click that, and that's put our origin in there. Okay, we need to put our destination in. As I said at the beginning, we'll be doing a Melbourne flight for this tutorial. So YMML goes in there and straight into the top right there for destination. Okay, again, if you need to know these codes, FS Commander, or you can go to the charts and have a look for Melbourne, and it'll have all the codes for the airports on the charts. Okay, so flight number, you don't need to put a flight number if you don't want to, but I like to fly proper flights and proper schedules. So just for this tutorial, we'll just make up a number, but you can actually go through the schedules and have a look and pick a correct flight number. So we'll just pick QF650. So that goes into flight number. So there's QF650. Now runway, we've already checked our weather, so we know we're using runway 21, so we just type in 21 into the bottom, and that just goes next to runway. Okay, so we've got all that information in there. Now you can see it says page 1 of 2. It's very important that at this stage you don't push activate. It's a little bit confusing when you first use this. You think that you've programmed the FMC, you've got your IRS position in, you've got your origin, your destination, your runway, and click activate. No, you don't actually click activate. You can see it's page 1 of 2. We now have to go to next page. Okay, what we've done is we've told the aircraft where we're going from and where we're going to, but we now have to tell the aircraft how we're getting there. So the next thing we do is click next page. Okay, so this is where we put our route in. Now to get our routes, all we have to do is come back here and we go to our website. We go to flight planning and we come down here and we go to Australia FMC IFR routes. So we click on that and here's all our routes. So we just scroll through, it's all in alphabetical order, so we just scroll through until we find YPPH. So YPPH is on this side and then YMML on the right. So we've got YPPH and YMML. Okay, as you can see there's 4 different routes that we can use. For this particular flight we're going to be using the H4, which is this one here. So all we need to do is we now need to start programming our FMC. You don't have to worry about the DCT because that just means direct. So all we're worried about is the Perth, the PH, and so on and so forth. Now what this PH is an abbreviation for Perth. So it always has a waypoint and then an airway, a waypoint and then an airway. So we're actually looking for these here. Now this will all be in the flight planning stage as well, in the video tutorial. So again, it's a good idea to actually look at that training tutorial for flight planning because it goes through all of this stuff. So what we'll do is we'll just go through the route. I won't spend too much time on how to do it because that's all in flight planning. So now we'll just program FMC. So first thing we do is we always start on the right hand side because that's our 2. So this is where all our waypoints go, and our left side is all our VIAs, which is our airways. So it's always a waypoint and then an airway. So working from right to left, always on the right hand side. So we put our PH in there first. So we go PH, that goes into the top of the right hand side. Now as you'll see here, it's now asking for a selected waypoint. Now 9 times out of 10 these departure points, we always use the VOR as the departing waypoint. So it always uses a nav aid, so like a VOR NDB. Some waypoints are actually used NDBs, so some airports use NDBs. It just depends on the actual chart, so it's a good idea to have a look at the chart. Also FS Commander has all that information because you can actually see the airways, so it's a good idea to have a look at that tutorial as well. But for this, we're using Perth VOR, so we use 11370 and it actually tells you there PH VOR, so that's the VOR there, so that's the one we select and that just goes into there. So the next thing we need to do is we now need to put an airway in there. So we've told it we're going direct to the Perth VOR, and then we have to tell it where we're going from there. So the next one will be an airway. So we come back to our routes page and H18. So H18 now goes into the FMC. So H18, and that goes into the next line. As you can see, we've already got via direct, so that's direct Perth. And so we just go into the next one where there's a blank space, so we just put that in there. Okay, as you can see, we're going through the FMC. It's now starting to look like a programming. You can see how it's going from each point. So now now it's asking for another waypoint. So each time you put in an airway, it will ask you for another waypoint. So the next waypoint after that, we come to our route. Okay, we've got NSM. So NSM now goes in there, NSM. So we've now put that in, and that goes into there. Okay, so next thing we need to do is put the airway in there. So we go to the routes page and we go J21. So that's the next airway we're using. So we've got J21, and that just goes into there, and then it's asking for the next waypoint. Okay, so we just keep going. We just follow this same process right to left. waypoint airway, all the way through until we've got the route all the way in. So ISLAV will be the next waypoint. So we just type that into there. Okay, so that goes into there. Now you can also, if you find it a bit difficult or a bit annoying to use the keys on here with the mouse, you can click keyboard up here at the top of the FMC. It says keyboard. It's lit up keyboard. What that means is that you can now type the information on your computer's keyboard rather than using the actual buttons on the FMC. So that's another way you can do it as well, which is makes it a little easier. But I'll just continue to use the FMC buttons for this video. So the next waypoint, we put our waypoint in there. So now we need to put an airway in there. So the next airway will be N640. So we put that in N640. So that just goes into there, and there it is. Asking for another waypoint. Next waypoint will be AD, which is Adelaide. So we go AD, and we put another airway in there, which will be V255, which is this one here. So we type in V255, and that just goes into there. Okay, now it's asking for another waypoint. So we come back here, and we got TBD. So up in TBD, TBD, and we type that in. Okay, now see how we've run out of room on this page? But if we look at our route, we've still got more information to put in. So what we need to do now is, see how it says page 2 of 3? Again, all you need to do is push next page. You don't click activate until we've actually finished putting all the information in for our route. So all you have to do is, each time you get to the end of a page, you just click next page, and it'll just go create a new page. Okay, so all we do is we just follow the same procedure. Okay, we've put our waypoint and our airway, waypoint airway, waypoint airway. So the last thing we put in here was a waypoint. Okay, so the next page we've got to put another airway. So the next airway we put in there is the Y12. So you just type in Y12, type that in there, and then and it's asking for another waypoint. So we now put in our next waypoint, which is RB. So put that in next. So that just goes into there, and then we just put another airway in, which is H119. So we put in H119, and that goes into there, and it's asking for another waypoint. So come back to our routes and ML. Okay, don't worry about the direct. All it means is that from Melbourne we're going direct. Okay, so that's just part of the route. So we just type in ML. That goes into there. Okay, so basically what we've got is our whole route. So we'll just go back to here. We go back to page 1 of 3. So now we've got 3 pages within our route. We've got our main route page with our origin, our destination, our flight number, and our departure runway. We then click next page, and it will tell we're now going to tell the FMC how we're actually going to do this flight. So we've told it we're going from Perth to Melbourne. And the next page we've programmed it to tell it how we're getting there. So we're going from Perth VOR to the H18 airway to Norseman, the J21 airway to ISLAV, on the N640 airway to Adelaide, on the V255 airway to TBD, next page, and then we're using the Y12 to RB, the H119 to Melbourne. Okay, so that's as far as we need to go. That's our whole route. We know that we've done the whole route because we've copied all the information that's to do with this route. We've got no more waypoints to put in. So then at this point we can now click activate. Okay, as you can see, we've now got a light on down here which is execute. Whenever you see this execute light, it is very important that you actually push the execute button before you leave this page, because even though you've pushed activate, unless you actually execute it, it will not send that information to the FMC. So it won't actually program all that information to the aircraft's computer. So you need to make sure that whenever you see this light on, before you actually leave the page that you're on in here, that you actually push this execute button. So we push execute. That's now programmed all that information. It's all locked in to the computer, and we can now go on and program our performance data for the aircraft. Okay, so this is where we put all our performance stuff, so our gross weight, our fuel, reserves, cruising altitude, things like that. Okay, so this is where we need to go to our iFly configurator. So we need to know what the gross weight is. Now the FMC works in a metric of ton, so it uses the weight measurement of ton, but our configurator, as you can see, uses the measurement of kilos. So we now need to convert the kilos to ton. Now the easiest way to do that is we just have to move the decimal point on this here. So instead of it being 78,129 kilos, it's going to be 78 ton, because there's 1,000 kilos to a ton. So all we need to do is just put a decimal point in there. So it's 78. We know it's 78 ton. So we just have to make it 78.1. Okay, we've just always got to put 0.1. So whenever we see a number after the 78, we've got to put 0.1. So we go back to our FMC, and we've got to put 78.1 in here. So we just go 78.1, because that's 78.1 ton as our gross weight. That goes in there, and as you can see, it's already programmed our fuel and our zero fuel weight. Okay, so 17.3 ton of fuel on board, which is 17,300 kilos. Okay, so all you need to do is just put your gross weight in there. The fuel is already calculated because you've already done the iFly configurator before you actually started Flight Sim, and your zero fuel weight is already calculated as well. Okay, now we need to put our reserves in there. Now our fixed reserve for the iFly 737 is always 2.2 ton, so that's 2,200 kilos. So all we need to do is put 2.2, and that just goes into reserve. So that we've now just told the computer that we've calculated 2.2 ton of reserves in our fuel. Okay, now cost index. Now I won't go into too much information about the cost index. It's a bit complicated. It's basically how much fuel it burns, what the cost is, basically the fuel flow. So we just put 60. Okay, that will never change. So the reserves is always 2.2, and the cost index is always 60. So that just goes into there. Okay, so cruising altitude, we're going across to Melbourne at 35,000. So we'll go 35,000. Now whenever you're heading in an easterly direction, you always have to use odd numbers. Whenever you're heading in a westerly direction, you always have to use even numbers. So we're heading in easterly, so we're using odd numbers. So 35,000, that just goes into there. Okay, as you can see now, this execute light has now come on. Now we actually haven't finished in this page yet, so you can't actually hit execute until you've actually finished programming the information you need to in this page. So we've now got to put in one more thing. Don't worry about cruise wind or our ISO deviation or our outside air temperature, because we can't calculate any of that information. We don't know what that's doing at cruise, so we just leave all that blank. All we need to do is change our transition altitude to 10,000. So whenever we're in the southern hemisphere, we use 10,000 feet. Whenever we're in the northern hemisphere, we use 18,000 feet. So you've just turned 10,000. That's now changed that. You can see it says page 1 of 2. Now we'll go to next page, but we don't have to change any information in here. Okay, that's all set. This performance limits for these speeds, for the max speed, the cruising speed, the descent speed, all our climb speeds and everything in here. We don't have to worry about anything like that. So in our performance initial, all we need to do is do page 1. Once we've put all this information in, we can then click execute, and we can then go on to the next part. Okay, we now want to go into our takeoff stage. So all we have to do there is just click initial ref, which is this button up here, and that will take us to our takeoff reference. Okay, now always flaps 5 for the 737. So you see it says 2 boxes there. Okay, if you were using 10 degrees of flap, you would just put 10, but we're only using 5 degree of flap. You don't have to actually put 05. All you have to do is put 5, and that one goes into there. As you can see, our V speeds have automatically come up over the side here. The next thing we do is put our center of gravity in. So we come back to our iFly configurator, and there's our center of gravity, 30.8. So that just goes into there, 30.8. And what that does is the center of gravity, once you put that in, the iFly is different to other aircraft in the fact that it will automatically set the takeoff trim for you. So once you've actually put that center of gravity in there, you do not need to trim the aircraft or set the trim for takeoff. It will do that for you automatically. The next thing you have to do is these V-speeds. Now you can see that they're in small numbers at the moment. You actually have to push the buttons that correspond to those V-speeds. Unless you actually push those buttons, you're not actually locking in those V-speeds, so to speak. You actually have to push each one of these buttons next to the V-speed. Now as you can see, each time you push a button, it actually makes these numbers bigger. So there you go. So as I'm pushing them, they're going bigger. So once they've actually been enlarged, those numbers, you know that you've actually selected those V-speeds. So what they do is the V-speeds are automatically calculated for you, but then you have to actually accept those V-speeds as being correct, and you just push the buttons next to it. Now we know they're correct because they've already been calculated by the FMC, so they'll be more accurate than what you or I could actually calculate. So all you need to do is once those V-speeds come up, just push the button next to those speeds, and that's it. Okay, see there it says pre-flight complete. We now want to go to the next page. So it says page 1 of 2, so we now go to next page. Okay, we now want to put in our runway wind. Okay, so we've already checked our weather, but always a good idea to go back and just double check your weather again and just get a quick update just to make sure there's been no changes. Okay, as you can see, there's now a wind change. Okay, quite a significant wind change. There's no gusts. It's the wind has actually changed direction and has slightly weakened. So we now need to use this wind here to put it into our FMC. We just checked the ATIS again. We're still using runway 21. Okay, so the wind is now 080 at 13. So we come back here and we go 080 at 13. Now you can see what the layout here is. It wants 3 digits, slash, and then 3 more digits. Now you don't have to actually put 3 digits in here because your wind won't be strong enough to, you're not going to be taking off with 100 knots of wind. I mean, if you're taking off with anything more than about 25 knots of wind, then that's obviously too windy for the flight. So we're using runway, wind is 080 at 13. So all we need to do is just type in 3 digits, 080. Now if we're using, if the wind was 200 degrees, you would type 200/13. But we're using 080, so always 0 before the digit. If you've only got, if the wind's 80 or 40 or whatever, always make sure you put that 0 in. Always put that same layout that they're asking for. So 080/13, that just goes up into there. Now runway slope, I wouldn't worry about that, and I wouldn't worry about this outside air temperature either. It tells you here that it's 17 degrees, so we don't have to worry about that. All we need to do is put our thrust reduction in. So basically, once we've actually taken off, it wants to know what altitude above ground level. So AGL, that we need to actually reduce our climb thrust. So we're going to reduce our climb thrust at 1500 feet AGL. So that just goes into there. So 1500, and that just goes into there. Don't worry about our runway condition. We've got dry at the moment. It's set for dry. If it was wet, you could actually select wet, but that's fine. It's a dry runway, and that's all fine. I wouldn't worry about changing any of that. Once you've done that, it's all in there. We can now go to our departure arrival. So what we've done is we've told the aircraft where we're flying from and to. We've told the aircraft how we're getting from our departure to our destination. So we now need to tell it how we're actually departing from Perth. Obviously we're not going to go direct to the Perth VOR and then depart on our airway from there. We're actually going to do what's known as a SID, a standard instrument departure. So we now need to program the FMC to tell it how we're going to depart Perth. So all we need to do is now click on departure arrival, and this brings up our departure arrival page. Okay, we've got departure YPPH, so that's departure Perth at the top. We've already told it we're going to Melbourne, so it's now got Melbourne arrival. Now all we need to do is click on this next to departure, and this will bring up all our departures. Okay, so you can see over here we always start from the right hand side and then go to left. So always select your runway and then we select our SID. As you can see here, runway 21 is already set to activated. The reason for that is because when we first programmed our route, we told it that we were departing on runway 21. Now we've just checked the ATIS again, and it is still runway 21, but if the runway had changed to runway 03 or a different runway, we would then come back in here and select a different runway down the side here. But we are still using runway 21, so we actually select that. So it now tells us that runway 21 is selected, and you can see the execute light is on, but we haven't actually finished in here, so you don't actually push that until we're finished. So the next thing we have to do is tell it what departure we're doing. Okay, so the actual route that we followed over here, over here, as you can see, the NSM, so that's our first major waypoint, NSM, so we're looking for that in our actual SID. So come back to our aircraft, you can see our SIDs are down here. You got page 1 of 3, so we've got 3 SIDs, or three pages of SIDs, so we just go next page until we find the one we're looking for. Look, there's NSM right here. So we're actually going to do the NSM1 departure. So all we do is click that. There's no transition, so that just says none. So it now tells us that we've selected runway 21 and we're doing a Norseman 1 departure. They're both selected, so now we can click execute. Alright, so that's all done. The next thing we have to do is go into our legs page, because this now tells us all the legs or all the waypoints that we're actually going to be doing. It tells us what our waypoints are in order, our distance, and all that information there. So we've got our, basically just go from the distance, and that's what we're looking at. It tells us our altitudes over here. So our altitude is 3,580 for our first waypoint, all the way through until we get up to PIY, and we'll be at flight level 293, and there's, as you can see, there's 6 pages. Now what's very important here in the legs page is that you go through and make sure that there's no route discontinuities, and what that means is that there is a double up of waypoints, and or there's actually a gap somewhere. So what we do is we just go through our next page, and look, there's our first route discontinuity. Now what it's doing is it's got us flying through all these waypoints, and then it's going to NSM, which is Norseman, and then we've got a gap, and then it's going back to Perth. Well, obviously we're not going to go back to Perth, so what we need to do is we now need to go through our legs, our different waypoints, and we find where there is the next NSM. There will be a second NSM in there, so we go through, and there's our second NSM. So all we do is we look at the next waypoint after NSM. So in this case it's CAG, so we just click on the button next to CAG. That will bring it up on the bottom there. We then go previous page, we then find the other NSM, because that's the next waypoint after NSM. So we now need to go back to where the first NSM is, and we put that in there. Okay, so that's now cleared that discontinuity. So you just go through and just make sure that there's no more route discontinuities, and so far so good, all the way through to Melbourne. Okay, so we just double check everything, make sure it's all looking good, no route discontinuities, there's no double ups of waypoints, there's no gaps. We're not flying back to Perth, which would make no sense at all, and everything's looking really good like it should. Okay, once all that's done and you're happy with that, you then click execute. Okay, so that has now programmed all that information into the FMC. Okay, so that's the end of that. We're now finished on the FMC. We can now click progress, and this information tells us how we're actually progressing on the flight. It tells us our waypoints down the left hand side here. It gives us our distance to that waypoint, our time to that waypoint in GMT time, and how much fuel we'll have on board once we actually get to that waypoint. So coming down here, we've got our destination as YMML. It tells us how many miles away it is, so it's 1,553 miles. We should be arriving there at 040 Zulu, and our fuel on board will be 6.8 tonne. If you ever look down here, it says fuel quantity, so that's 17.3. That's how much fuel we've got on board now. So as we're progressing through the flight, the fuel quantity, that amount will actually go down, and that always tells you what your current fuel status is. Okay, so that will continue to actually drop through the flight. So if you always want to know how much fuel you got on board, that's your fuel quantity, and that will always tell you what your current fuel is. You've got to top a climb. Now this is very important. To top a climb, 115 nautical miles, so that's how long it's going to take us to climb to 35,000 according to the information that we've told it. Obviously that will vary a little bit depending on wind, airspeed, all the rest of it, but at the moment 115 miles to top a climb. Now if you get to this stage in the FMC programming and you come to here and you've got no top of climb, so you've got 2 TC but there's no information under there, then you've missed something in the FMC programming and you'll have to go back and recheck it and make sure that everything's right. You've missed a step somewhere. But if you're following this video tutorial, you shouldn't have any problems. You should get to this stage and all should be sweet. This is what this tutorial is all about, is helping you to be able to fly this aircraft without making any errors, and you should be able to just get all the way through and you've got your top of climb, and it tells you what your wind is. Okay, so the current wind is 0840 degrees at 13, so it has changed again slightly. We actually programmed it for 080 at 13. It's now 084, so not a real drama there. Now if there was a major wind change in here, you would have to, before you actually depart, make sure that you check the ATIS again, and you may have to just quickly program the FMC for the wind change for runway procedure. So all you need to do is, if you need to do that, all you have to do is just go back into departure arrival. You would just click on departure and then you would just select the different runway that you need, and that'd be that. So yeah, same again, you would just go back through here, select the runway, select the SID and click execute, but we don't have to do any of that because we're still using runway 21. So that's the end of the FMC. We've programmed it all. We can now close that down and we can now start programming our autopilot or mode control panel, MCP. So the first thing we do is we come over here, we change this VOR switch here to ADF1, and as you can see, that's now brought up the ADF1. Now this has actually brought up the ADF or NDB rather for the frequency that we put in our electrical. So we put in 329, that's the frequency for the CVM NDB, and you can see that that's come up there now. So that's why we put that there. So this is the captain's multifunction display. This is the first officer's multifunction display. So we'll program things over here first, and then we'll come over here and do things over here in the first officer's panel. The next thing we need to do is we need to change our altimetry. So it's actually set for radio altimeter at the moment, but we want to set it to barometer. So we just put our hand on the barometer. Make sure you've actually got a hand, not a plus, because the plus will actually change the QNH. So we want to actually make it barometer. Okay, so we're now on the altimetry is now set for barometer. We want to come over here and we want to make it hectopascal. So as you can see, it's already set for inches. You have a look down here on the primary flight display and it actually says inches. We actually use hectopascals in Australia, so we'll go HPA, hectopascals, and you can see that that's now changed to 1017, which is millibars or hectopascals. So that's just changed that. Leave this one here as VOR2. That's not a problem, because what that'll do is that will actually leave it in the frequency that you've actually set in nav1 and nav2. So that's not a problem there. Next thing we do is come over here, we put our flight director on. So once we put our flight director on, this little light here will come up as to letting you know that the flight director's on. We now need to select our course. Now if we go back to our airport chart, this will tell us our course. Okay, so we've got the ILS frequency, we've got the NDB frequency, we've got the VOR if we need it, and we've got our ILS course. As you can see here, it's got 196. Okay, so that's what we need to put into our course. So that becomes 196. Now if you use the right mouse button, your digits will actually go up in multiples of 10. If you use the left mouse button, they'll go up in single digits. Okay, so all you need to do is we'll set that back to zeros. All you need to do is change the 0 to a 6 using the left mouse button, and then the right mouse button just all the way up until that becomes 19. So there it is, 196. Okay, don't worry about the auto throttle for now. We'll put that on prior to taxi. Indicate airspeed, again we changed that to 240, so again you can use the right mouse button, so just change that all the way up to 240. There it is, so we set that for 240. Now what happens is once we actually get airborne and we turn all our autopilot on, the FMC will then control our altitude and our airspeed and our heading, but we've actually got to select 240 as our departure airspeed so that we don't go above 250 knots below 10,000 feet. So we just have to program that for 240 so that we don't actually break that 250 knot rule. Okay, heading again, a heading and course must be the same. So all along we've got the course, the heading, and the first officer's course all have to be the same. So the heading, again, we just select that for a 6 using the left mouse button, and right mouse button we just change that till it says 19, and then we got 196. Okay, so we got 196, 240, 196. Now altitude, we select our altitude. We've programmed our FMC for 35,000. So all we do is right mouse button all the way up to 35,000. We can go straight up, because what will happen is the FMC will actually do a step climb for us. So the FMC will actually control the whole aircraft through the whole flight. It will maintain the airspeed, the heading, and the altitude for us, and it will just do step climb all the way up to 35,000. Next thing we do is turn the first officer's flight director on, so that's now on, and we select course for the first officer's course selector. So we just change that again with the left mouse button to 6, and then right mouse button until we get 19, and there's 196 there. Okay, again we come over here, we change this to ADF1, and that's brought up the CVM NDB, which we program into the ADF 2 on the aft electrical panel. So there's our ADF 2. We've programmed that for 329, and that's what comes up on the first officer's panel. And again, we need to change this altimetry from radio to barometer, and this is already set to HPA, so you don't need to change that. The next thing we need to do is come down here to where we've got this MFD, and we've got ENG and SYS. Now we need to push the button that says ENG, because as you can see that brings up our N2 information. So if we push that, that brings up all this information here. It brings up our N2, our fuel flow, oil pressure, oil temp, oil quantity, and engine vibration. And also in the bottom here we've got all our fuel quantity. So in our left and right tanks we've got 3.51, 3.52, and center tanks is 1019. So what will happen is the left and right tanks will actually draw fuel from the center tank. So the left and right tank figures will not actually go down during the flight. You'll see that this 10.19 will actually go down and actually drains fuel from the actual center tank. What will happen is during the flight, as you get towards the end of your flight, you'll see these numbers will actually go down quite significantly. And once you get to once these numbers go to a 0 point whatever, so it'll actually go below 1, but we'll show you all that in the third tutorial. You then need to turn your center pumps off, because otherwise it'll just continue to drain fuel from the center tank until there's nothing left, and then yeah, you'll have big problems. So you need to actually watch this during the flight, and when this actually gets below 1.0 ton, you need to actually change the tank, so you turn the center tanks off, but we'll go through all that in the third video. So all we're really looking for here is that we push engine, we bring that up, and this is very important that we have this information, this N2, once we actually start our engines, because we're actually looking for this N1% to come up to 20 before we start engines, but we'll go through that once we go to engine startup stage. Last thing we need to do is just change this here to ADF. This is our radio magnetic indicator, so this is our backup systems for our VOR and ADF, so we just change that to ADF, and that will then point to the NDB that we've selected, which is CVM. Okay, so we've now got all our systems up and running. We've programmed the FMC, and we're basically up to the stage now where we are ready to do a pushback and engine startup. So what we'll do is the normal procedure is to do a pushback, and as we're pushing back, we start the right hand engine, and then once we've actually pushed all the way back, we can then start the left hand engine. But what we'll do for the purpose of this video tutorial, I'll actually just do the pushback, and then we can concentrate on actual engine startup. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get rid of the jetway, the air bridge there, so we get rid of that. We close the door, and we'll close the door first and then get rid of the jetway. It doesn't really matter, but yeah, so we close the door, get rid of the air bridge, and then we go up here to forward overhead, and we turn our anti-collision on, beacon on. So that anti-collision on, and we just close the overhead again, and I'll just request a pushback, and then we can do engine startup. Okay, so we can do a pushback, release the brakes on the throttle quadrant. So what I'll do is we're normally now, as we're pushing back, we would normally start the right hand engine, but I'll just wait until we've actually pushed back, and then we go through the full complete engine startup. The other thing you can do, if you want to, you can bring up the first officer's FMC and just hit progress on that, so that will then display the same information that's on the captain's FMC. So you got, as you can see, you got progress over here, flight number, progress, and you've got progress here, QF650 progress. So you can bring that up. Yeah, unfortunately you can't bring them up at the same time, but you can just bring that up and hit progress, and that will bring that information up. Okay, we're almost completed the pushback. So we just push back. We want to taxi out to runway 21, so we push back around to the left, so that we're facing in the right direction. Once we've completed the pushback, we can then set the parking brake. Okay, so parking brake is now set. Okay, so we can now go through the engine startup. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we open up our throttle quadrant, and we can leave that open, and we then open up our overhead. And now this is very important, this next stage. It's important that you get this in the right order. For your engines to start correctly, you need to turn your left and right pack switches off and your left and right electric fan. So all you need to do is turn the left pack switch off, the right pack switch off, the left electric fan off, and the right electric fan off. Okay, once that's off, you'll actually hear the air conditioning system shut down, and all we need to do then is come down to our right engine start switch. Okay, so all we need to do is, you got engine 1, engine 2, leave the engine start switch on both, and the actual start switch here, we move that to ground. Okay, to GRD ground. Okay, so all we do is we just come back to our throttle quadrant. We're looking for this here. See these N2 numbers coming up? Once they actually come up to 20, which that one has now, we just turn our fuel control on. Okay, and then you'll see N1 starting to come up. You'll see the fuel flow. You'll see oil pressure coming up, oil temp coming up, engine vibration coming up. So everything on the right-hand engine is now coming alive. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for 20.0 on our N2. Once we get to 20.0, we can then open up our fuel control valve. Okay, once all that's coming up, we just keep an eye on that, make sure that's all normal. Nothing's in the red or low oil pressure or anything like that. If we had low oil pressure, we would shut the engine down immediately. But if you don't have any system failures set for your flight, then you shouldn't have any problems with that. Next thing we do is we come back to the overhead, and you'll see that this engine start switch has actually come to auto again. That will automatically go back to auto. Once that actually hits auto, you can then do the left engine start switch to ground, close the overhead, and again we're looking for these numbers here. See these numbers here, they're coming up. So once that actually gets to 20.0, we can open up the fuel control valve for engine 1. So there's 20%, and we open up the fuel control valve. You'll see engine 1 and 1% coming up, the exhaust gas temperature coming up, the fuel flow, the oil pressure, oil temp, oil quantity. Well, that won't change, but the vibration. So things you're looking for on here is you're mainly watching the oil pressure and the oil temp. So if your oil pressure drops or your oil temp rockets, then you need to shut down the engine immediately. So that's all good, no problems there. That's a textbook engine startup. So then we just close the throttle quadrant, we go back to our overhead, we just make sure that that ground switch has gone back to auto, and we now need to turn our engine generator switches on. So you can see now the engine generator switches lights are available where our engines are running, so we now need to turn our generator switches on, so both those lights will go out. As you can see now, the APU gen light switch has now become available. You can't actually have the generator engine generators running as well as the APU generators running. You can only have one or the other. So what it does, it actually closes that circuit. It actually turns off the APU generator switches, or turns off the generator, and the light becomes available. Okay, next thing we have to do is our bleed switches. Okay, we need to turn off our APU bleed. Our duct pressure will drop back to 0, and we need to turn our engine 1 bleed switch on and our engine 2 bleed switch on, and you'll see our duct pressure will come back up. We then turn our left pack switch back to high, our right pack switch back to high, our left electrical fan auto and right electrical fan auto, and now we've got all our air conditioner systems up and running again. Okay, so we're now running on engines. So we come over here to our volts, our electrical panel. We change our AC volts to generator 2 or generator 1. It doesn't really matter. Generator 1, generator 2, but yeah, just take it off APU gen and you put it on gen 2, because we're no longer running on the APU gen. We're running on engine generators. So that's that will now give us the information for that. You can just leave that on battery. That's fine. And we come over here to our yaw damper. We turn our yaw damper on, and as you can see, that light will then go out. Okay, now all we need to do is turn our APU off. See how this APU generator light is still on? That means that it's available. The APU generators are available. Now the reason they're available is because our APU is still running. So all we need to do is come down to our APU and just turn it off, and that light will go out. So now our APU is off. Engines are fully running, we're all up and running, and we're good to go. So the next thing we would do is turn our auto throttle on. So we turn our auto throttle arm, we come down here, we turn our auto brake to RTO, and we set flaps for 5 degrees, which is what we programmed the FMC for. So 5 degrees on the flaps. Auto brake for RTO and auto throttle to arm. Next thing we would do is request a taxi clearance. We get a taxi clearance to runway 21. We then open up the overhead and we turn our taxi lights on, and we're ready to go. So that's basically a whole overview of how to start the aircraft from cold and dark, turning all the systems on, programming the FMC, engine startup, and getting it to a taxi stage. So what we'll do is we'll end the tutorial here, and the next video tutorial will actually start on the runway, and everything will be on and running as it is now, and we'll just continue on from here into the next stage, and we'll go from the takeoff stage to the top of climb stage. So yeah, we hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks very much.